when something finally happens. We have to go back in time. This is the year 2024. I don't like to do math in public, but I believe 15 years ago was 2005 or 2004. Is that right? Or is that 20 years ago?
15 years ago would be like 2010, 2020, right? I mean, 20.
So, okay, 20 years ago, 2024. Wait.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how math works,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, cool. Anyways,
Nonetheless, a while ago, something happened.
wow. So, I got married July in 2005. And oddly enough, I think it's our friend Charles Lowell's birthday, the day that I got married. Or maybe
Oh,
not. It's 15th or 16th of July. I used to have it engraved inside my wedding ring, so I could look at it. But then I was in Basel, Switzerland, and I was in this whirlpool, and my wedding ring got shot off, and I haven't replaced it since, which I need to get around. Kim actually suggested the other day that as a temporary one, I should get one of those horseshoe ones, which I'm all for. I would love to get one of those. But she saw my enthusiasm, and very quickly she said, as a temporary one.
it's
So,
okay. Be careful.
yeah.
Yes.
Anyways, so I was still a programmer back then. I was a certified Scrum Master. We were doing burn down charts. I think Kanban boards were a thing back then. And
Certainly.
there's a lot that goes into planning a wedding. A lot of ins, a lot of outs, projects, budgets, things here. And I think at the time I suggested maybe we should use a Kanban board. And that did not fly. In 2004, that suggestion was not accepted, which I think is fine. But things have evolved in those past 20 years long enough that there was a New York Times article where I think I think the people in question, one of them was a tech person, of course, and the other was not a tech person. But they used, to plan their wedding, a Kanban board, Slack, and even shared calendars. And I think more so than how close we're getting to AGI or whatever, shortening release cycles, we're finally done stripping down platform as a service down to infrastructure. We're rebuilding it back up to PaaS. Probably in 5 years, we're going to strip it down to something else. We love this cycle. More importantly, people are using Kanban boards to plan their wedding. And I feel like, I really like improving. I like the idea of governments improving how they do software because, my theory is that's the biggest leverage on improving humanity's life. I feel like maybe the application of Kanban boards to wedding planning, and if we expand it into family planning in general, not family planning as in pregnancy, but running your family, I think maybe that will have the largest effect that Kanban boards have had since maybe Toyota or ever. So I think we're on the right track. Lots of optimism mid-year in 2024 here.
Well, what was the I mean, I think there's maybe some obvious things, but like what was the obvious, or what was the objection to the Kanban board by your wife, or at the time fiance? And then more importantly, if you did follow a process, I guess in the end, not having a process is a process. So you can always go with that answer. Like how did you plan your wedding?
Well, it was so long ago that I don't really remember the objections, so I'm conjecturing here. And I think based on the digital transformation of introducing calendars into our life, going from an analog calendar to a digital one.
Oh, so this was kind of pre-Google Calendar where everyone sort of had that, I guess.
Yes,
That we have to remember as well. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're talking 2004.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's it was like, why would you have that online? That was like a work thing you're dragging into personal life.
Right. Like, so email, totally cool.
Yeah. Calendar's not. Yeah. I remember
like
that.
even instant messaging, sort of, right? But it's a desktop thing that you do.
Yeah. Not a texting thing. Yeah.
And text messaging, not really at all. Like you could do it on those
it's like SMS things. And you had to have you didn't send long text. I remember.
Right. So, I mean, all of us nerds, of course. I mean, I had an alphanumeric pager in like 1993,
right,
or whatever. So, sure. But again, drawing on an analogy, recently we finished the multi-decade digital transformation for our calendaring system here.
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to a good bonus for CY 2024 for completing
Right.
that project. Um, but the culture shift there was around just the perception. Perception has a judgmental word of it, but around the utility of having a physically centralized, easy to see and modify calendar, which is to say, a traditional calendar hung up in the kitchen, right?
Mhm.
You can just walk right up to it. You can write things. You can scratch things out. You can see what date is. You can look at stuff. It's very easy to use if, an information radiator, as they said back in the late 90s.
Right.
If you have that. Now, as with so much in the digital transformation world, the problem was that you had two conflicting cultures at work. I was always using this digital calendar,
Right.
and the rest of the family was using this paper calendar. And
Yep.
so, um, because I was I guess the nerd, I would have to sync my calendar to the analog calendar
Yep.
and sync the analog calendar to my calendar. And as
Mhm.
you can imagine, as if we're going from like paper receipts to like EDI or something. Like this causes all sorts of synchronization problems, right? And what you need to do whenever there's some big planning, like we got to plan a vacation, like I would have to like sit down, we'd have to have a meeting. I'd sit down with the people, I'd print out all of the stuff. I'd go from my digital calendar to a printed
Mhm.
out calendar. By the way, Postlight has this great thing called Tiny Calendar that's great at
Mhm.
this. You print that out, and then you can kind of compare and contrast. You sync up the calendars. Then I take those paper things and I sync it back into the digital world. And I don't even have like, Infosys or Capgemini to help me. Right. So it's a lot of work.
So you were
Uh,
suffering from a little status quo bias. You just couldn't. The team was they had the process, the paper process, and that was
yeah.
working for them. And you couldn't get them into the digital transformation
Yeah.
world.
I think let me check here. I think the one of the when we did a retrospective, I think one of the notes I had from the team was this works fine if you would just do it.
Yeah,
So
there you
I think
go. That's a good one. That's always a fun one. Well, I look forward to that. I think one other quick wedding story. For you, I just for whatever reason, I believe I remember this about your wedding, and because you were so ahead of your time, as well as the Kanban board, I believe you're even ahead of your time with banking. So at the time, I think you chose to use a online bank, as I remember,
that's right.
and that was your way of which again, people are like, of course you did. Well, it wasn't the case then, but then I remember, I believe something like the venue like required you to write a check and it needed to be done like immediately. And it was like
Yes.
you didn't have like you just like your bank just couldn't do it. And they, like
I
we
forgot about that. That's right.
something
That's
along
right.
those lines. And then I remember I think a friend and a coworker at the time, I think they sort of floated you like, you're like, I don't
Yep,
even say it,
exactly.
was like they acted as your local bank so that you could eventually use
Yeah,
the
they're
venue.
like my friendly loan shark.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
something along those lines. So I
I
think
think
that's what it was, right? So that was so again, digital transformation really got you in trouble back
that
in your
yeah,
wedding.
yeah. I forgot about that. What happened there is I used there's a good additional thing that is I used a bank called Next Bank, which is one of the first totally online banks because in the late 90s I had worked at a online banking startup, Funds Express, where we wrote software that banks use for online banking. So of course I was like, you got to do that. And Next Bank had one of these things where I needed, man, I don't know how much money it was, however many thousands of dollars you need to book a venue, and the person wouldn't take a check. They wanted cash.
That's what it was. Yes, right.
And so since it's an online bank, you couldn't really go get cash anywhere.
Right.
And
You're
so
limited
yes.
by ATM withdrawals a certain amount
Yeah.
per day,
And
right?
and
Yeah.
so I thought through the friends that we had, and I was like, I know that guy's got money and he's really nice. So I just basically wrote him he cast a check for me basically. And there you go. It was great. That was nice. And then also related to Next Bank, that's when I discovered that the FDIC works because the bank went bankrupt at some point, and I was completely solvent.
Oh,
I
nice.
got all the money, so I think that happened with them. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the FDIC jumped in, and my assets were
Well,
fully
I think
covered.
this is, I mean, times have changed, of course. Now there's plenty of online planning, wedding sites, The Knot, and many, many others. But, be careful, everyone, with your relationships. Don't let digital transformation get in the way of your nuptials. That's
Yeah.
the most important thing.
Yeah. Just do whatever works. If it's not working because you're not doing it, just take care of it. Do what works. I think that's the motto that we have nowadays from the thinking backwards and everything, right? Isn't it? Do what, or is that a pivotal motto? I forget.
Do it works. I like it.
Yeah. Outcomes. That's what we need to focus on.
Outcome based.
Speaking of outcomes, there's a new version of GPT out. It's called GPT-4 Outcomes, or Omni, I
That's
think.
right.
And I've only had, I think, maybe 24 hours to test it out. I didn't actually watch the demos because I thought, like, I read about the demos and I've got the thing, so I'm just going to demo it myself. But so far, my theory on this release is I don't have access to it yet.
Now, are you a subscriber to the GPT?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I'm surprised you haven't. I thought as a subscriber you would have already gotten access.
Well, now
But
this is
no.
a bit of a fake way to test it because I haven't tested this thoroughly with. Well, I kind of have tested it with Gemini. Gemini handles this differently, but with ChatGPT, oddly enough, it's not very self-aware that it is ChatGPT. So I
Mhm.
feel like if you ask it how to use it, it doesn't really know what you're talking about, like as if it hasn't read its own help
I'm
documents.
also going to apply this to Gemini. I had the same thing. We're going to get into some of the Google announcements. And the first thing I was so confused. So I asked Gemini, the free Gemini, I'm like, are you like, what Gemini are you? And it said it didn't know, but but then gave me some ideas about how I could find out. And I was like, this doesn't seem good, but go on. I want to hear
Yeah,
like,
no, I did the same thing. So I wanted to. I've heard that this voice thing is great because it's like super. Basically you can't tell the response time, blah blah blah. So I asked it in voice, do I have access to like the fast talking thing yet? And I was like, come on, if it knows what it is, like if you were to ask me, can you make me that thing that's wrapped up in a flat piece of bread? I'd be like, you want a taco, right? Sure, I can make a taco. What type of taco do you want?
that's
Right?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
and go right into it.
Tacos.
Anyways, and it said no, you haven't gotten access to the to the fast talking feature just yet. It might still be in the works or not included in your current setup. And right away you're like, oh, okay, thanks. And then if you were expecting to have that feature, checking with the service provider or in the settings might help you find more information.
Now I
What were
do
you hoping?
see in ChatGPT at the top, I have the drop downs where I can see clearly though, where it gives me access to 3.5. And then when it does the drop down, it tells me to pay. But if you listen to like one, I would wholly endorse watching the entire Chat GPT video because it's like, I think it's like 25 minutes and you can double speed it in 12 minutes. And it's like, I mean, this sounds obvious, but like shorter is better. And they just give you all the good stuff, right? There's none of there's like no fluff, right? There's just like maybe 1 minute of fluff about like what they're doing and a little CEO talk, and it's actually not from Sam Altman, it's from their head of research. I can't remember her name. She does a great job, but then they just go right in and do all the demos. And because I'll say when I clicked on this, I was like kind of in the more like I don't know, I'll say like Gen X, like okay, what's gonna happen here? But then I watched it and I was like, very cool. All the things are really cool. So I think the fast talking thing that you already mentioned, I mean, just so everyone else understands it, it's like essentially they've gotten to the point, at least in the demo, which looks very real. So again, we'll have to try it ourselves, that it's essentially like talking to the human being in the sense of latency, like how fast it responds. And of course, if you listen to this podcast, what do human beings like to do? We like to interrupt each other. You can just interrupt ChatGPT and it sort of takes it like a human being, right? It listens and will do it. So that was very, very impressive. The stuff that I thought was just immediately kind of like science fiction we've been talking about for years was when they said something like act as a translator, and one of the speakers spoke Italian, and it would just translate from Italian to English, like just in real time. And it was just like that was, I mean, going back maybe Star Trek. I don't know who the first science
Oh yeah.
for. Whereas like you can just like talk in and out of it, and and that was fantastic. The other thing that caught me off guard was like, because I know everyone's used the write a story about a unicorn and an apple or something like that. Like you've seen a lot of the textual based stuff, but the fact that it would then do it, and then it basically you'd be speaking to it and would start telling the story, and then when they told it to like tell it in a sarcastic tone, and it immediately adopts like a sarcastic narrator. It was like that again, also felt like science fiction because it really kind of like like sarcasm, I think is hard to explain to like young children. Like when you know what I mean? Like when they're going from like their literal brain to like kind of like metaphors and stuff. And it was like, I don't know, this computer immediately got it. That was to me also really, really good. So I guess, I don't know. I left it. I mean, you're probably hearing the tone of my voice. Like I was just like, wow, all of this stuff is really cool. And like, and this is, we'll just steal some Ben Thompson. I guess Ben Thompson's been talking about this on Trajectory and his podcast for a long time. It's like the idea of just talking to it in a way human beings speak did seem to like kind of change the whole interaction. So
Yeah. Well, it's good. Well, first of all, I have a small bit of feedback or whatever correction here. While you were talking, I was listening to you. Don't worry.
Of course you were.
But I went and opened a new chat window and set it to Chat GPT 4.0. And I asked it, what are the Chat GPT 4.0 features? And it actually answered it. Now,
okay, good.
These look like the right answers. And then I also asked it how I should do things differently, but I'm not going to go through that. So I'll try again to see if I've got the so-called fast talking thing, and see how that works out. But maybe it was user error, but whatever. And then, your reaction is reminding me, like, do you remember when Alexa and Siri first came out, and we were just like, this is going to be great. Like we assumed all these same things, right? And maybe it'll actually deliver. Like, in fact, I almost think that like I discount the voice AI stuff so much just because like it's completely dead to me because
it's been so bad, right? And I think they open up and we'll talk a little about Google in a second. Like the word, I guess the correct word, so I don't mean in a bad way, is just multimodal, right? But like I feel like every time I hear this word, I kind of start to zone out and I don't want to hear anymore. Like I sort of reject it. And that's what they kept saying in the demos. And I was like, but when they started to talk to it in real time on their phone, and again, like you kind of forget, like that's what they mean. It's like, oh, you can talk. And then they get into the other thing that they did was they just turned on the camera so it could essentially see things. And they wrote out a very simple algebra equation. I think it was 3x plus 1 equals 4. And then they held it up and they said, I'm learning algebra, something like, I'm learning algebra. Can you talk me through how to solve this equation? And it literally goes through and says, well, the first thing you want to do is get all your terms on like, the same side and group together. And like, kind of like you would teach like just like maybe a fourth or fifth, whatever grade you learn algebra in, maybe fifth grade. And it kind of walks through and it gives like both some encouragement and some explanation. And it's just looking at it. And you're like, again, it felt like the moment of like, whoa, like that's not only the fact you could solve it, but it could sort of like, the idea of being a teacher, but the idea that it sort of can contextualize like, no, I don't want you to just like, because, computers, right? Like we think of a computer as like, computers are just good at giving you an answer. It's like, no, I don't want you to actually give me the answer. I want you to like, educate me. And I was like, again, so that's sort of like, I kind of, to me, I kind of toned down my own, like my hatred of the word multimodal. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. So I can talk and it can see. And it's like, wow, those really open up like some amazing new things that you can do with it.
Yeah. Wait, this is interesting because, we've got some people writing, I'm working with some people writing an article to like put in CIO.com or whatever, one of these thought leadership things, which is fantastic. I don't mean my tone to be putting it down, but one of the point I make here a lot is like, and I was thinking about doing this as a topic for the executive dinner I have next week in Atlanta. Is like, does anyone actually have any ideas of how to use this AI stuff for boring everyday enterprise uses? And so far, there's like answers, but I don't know if they're great. But there's interesting ones, but we'll see what they are. But there's one I think that you're making me think of, which is like, a lot of what you do in knowledge work is just like telling people how to do stuff, like helping them like learn things and do things in a new way. And so maybe like you could have like little teachers, little mentors who would just say like, oh, here's how we close the books at the end of every week. And it becomes an expert on how you close the books and it can help you with that. Or like, here's the way, if you're pitching an acquisition, you need to format the presentation. And so you could show it each slide and it can be like, no, Chris doesn't, Chris, the VP of this, that, or the other, he doesn't like that kind of slide. And and then Sally over here, if you show her that kind of slide, it's not going to work. You got to do this. Like that would be fun to have it like help you strategize. How would you strategize doing an acquisition, given all of the parties involved and like all the meetings that you need to have, things like that? That kind of stuff. I mean, you need a huge knowledge base or whatever they call
Well,
it
there
to
was
do
a
that.
real stark, and maybe we'll get to some of the Gemini, the Google I/O was yesterday as well. So one, kudos to Open AI. They basically the day before they do 20-minute demo right before Google I/O, and it's like that's just good marketing, right? You're just like, I'm going to get my message out first, right? But I think the biggest takeaway is kind of like what I left the OpenAI Chat GPT was more like, oh, wait a minute. I can kind of like do anything. And when I can start talking to this, like, I think I'm just going to come up with like, it's just almost like you just want someone to talk to, like, and just want to ask questions. It's like, if it's always around, like if I'm by myself or I just want to, talk out loud or something and kind of all the things we thought maybe Alexa could do, like, it's sort of like left you sort of like with a spark of like, hey, here's a couple ideas, but like, we think when you kind of get this, you're just going to end up coming up with like some things that are probably only useful to you, but there's going to be tens of millions of them for every individual, right? So that was sort of like the, OpenAI sort of like, if you will, they sort of cracked open a massive horizon. And that was like in contrast to Google. So watching their thing where they had a lot of what you're talking about, like, hold on, like they weren't, I guess in some ways they would show you some of this, but then they would spend a lot of time talking about like a specific use case, right? Like, here's how you're going to do X, and then you're going to do Y, and you're going to have an agent, and then and then the agent's going to use the Google Nano or the Gemini Nano model, and the Nano model can also use the Gemini Advanced, and then if you want to, there's Gemini Ultra, and then they would go back through another agent and another use case, and I was like, you're sucking the fun out of this. You know what I mean? Like when I watched, and I think my guess is like it won't matter in the end, because it's like it's almost like Google search. Like once you got access to Google search, you didn't need people to tell you like what things you should be searching on. You quickly like you just kind of figured that out on your own. And that's sort of like what I found, that I think OpenAI, maybe because they're just smaller, they just sort of like they don't have the time or the ability to like think of all the stuff, whereas Google's like really trying to walk you through, and it's like no. I was almost like Google, I was like, get out of the way. Just show me more cool stuff, because they did one, the entire, if I could take the recommendation is they had this demo. Google did a similar demo where I only know the person's in England, and I'll tell you why in a second, but they essentially did the same kind of thing. They have Gemini, the person has a phone, they're in an office, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be boring, right? That was my immediate thing. And what they do, it was incredible though. They first they start walking around the office, right? And first, the person, as she holds up the phone to this developer's screen, it says, "What is this code doing?" And explains what the code is and stuff like that. Kind of stuff we've seen before, cut and paste, but it's cool. But then she takes the phone and she points it out the window, right? And you're like, okay, well, this is interesting. And she says, "Gemini, where am I?" And you're like, okay. And it tells her that she's somewhere in England, and it tells her why she believes it's English, because like roof lines and stuff like that. And you're like, that was cool, right? Then she goes over and points at like an architecture diagram. It's like, hey, what could I add here to make this like piece of software architecture more interesting? Fine. And they give some answer. And then she holds up like a box and a cat, a picture of a cat. Like, what does this remind you of? And then it says Schrodinger's cat. Then they actually have a dog. They have a dog in the office. Kudos for Google for having a dog in the office. They have a dog and a dog toy. And she shows it and she's like, hey, what would you name these two? And this is a dog and a toy. And then gives it some name. And then she throws a dog and fetch. And it was like super fun. And it was just like, all of these things are seemingly just like random stuff, but it's like, it reminded me of a human being in an office, because that's kind of what you do, right? You're like, you're working on some code, then you're talking about stuff and you're trying to figure out for lunch. And it was like so they had 2 hours of stuff. And I was like, that was their open AI moment. And again, I think it's sort of like, oh, once you start giving it to people, they'll figure it out. Now, Google packaged it around a million other, like how to plan, I can't, how to plan such and such event. And you're like, I don't even care about that. That's just like, that's boring. So
yeah,
there was a lot of cool stuff. So I guess my thing out of like leaving yesterday was like, even Google, even though they're going to like bury it and all this stuff, they still have some great stuff in there. It's gonna in it, but I think they're almost like once they get out of their own way, it's gonna be cool for all of us.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight in those two approaches, because you basically have the to summarize what you're saying is like, we're going to make a really good general purpose technology that just works and works quickly, right? And it's also easy to figure out how to use it, like search, right? Like search is just like type a thing into this bar, tells you what's there. And then similarly, like these chat things are just like, here's a bar, you type stuff in and it answers you, right? Or you know, you look at the roof line, like those kind of things, right? Like versus it's almost like this waterfalling of getting to the solution with the technology, which which has benefits, namely, especially if you're in a multi-billion-dollar business, you can go to your customers who are asking to please buy something, and you can give them something. And instead of, because you know, you don't want the answer to be like, I don't know, just screw around with it and see what's useful. But and like I think maybe, I mean, this is not like a hype cycle or a crossing the chasm or diffusion of innovations, but there must be some kind of model where it's like, now is the time where you just like fuck around with the technology. Like if you start trying to think about solutioneering with it and like the problems you're going to solve, that might work, but you're also risking just like being too narrow. It's almost like, I don't know enough about Watson, but I feel like Watson stuff came out with just like, here's the solutions we're going to do, instead of just being like, I don't know, let's see what happens, right? Like there's very specific solutions. And then like that maybe because the technology, I don't know, whatever. I'm not a Watson person,
Well, you're
but
hitting
like,
on some good stuff there, though, because I think what we found, and I think from some of the history we've talked about, and ChatGPT is like when they announced ChatGPT, they thought like, I don't know, maybe 10, 20,000 people will use it. So even they didn't know. Right. And so there are these moments where like you just kind of like, I would just call it almost like you kind of like going with the flow. And I feel like OpenAI is sort of like already there because they're also making their stuff more and more of it will be immediately free. And I think they've gotten to the point of like, oh, no. The more we show this to people, the more it will reveal itself like what people want to do. And eventually, because I don't think they would say this on a slide, but like eventually we'll figure out how to make money because there's just so much adoption, right? Whereas
yeah,
Google, I think, Google has a lot of that inside of it, but they also have kind of the history of like, no, we really want to like help you. We want to teach you all the things they can do it. And then throw in Amazon here because it's sort of as we went into these demos yesterday, after I was sort of like, I got out of them, I was like, oh, this is just cool. All of this was like really fun. I was like looking forward to using it all. And I was like, man, I wonder like what changed between like Monday before this and these days. And it's like, well, all the stuff we've been talking about lately is like, you watch the Amazon, keynote, and it's like, we got all these models or even the Google Cloud one. It's like, we got all this technology and we got all these models. And if you sign up, you can add it. And then if you add your data and you can do RAG, and it's just like, it's just all work, right? You're just like, I got to learn all of this. I got to somehow find the consoles. Like I got to pick the models. I got to figure out what data I want. It's just like, you're just like, oh, this just feels like a ton of work. I don't even know what
yeah,
it's going to do. And then and it's sort of like, oh, I'm just tired of talking about AI, right? That's sort of like, I would say pre-watching this demos. And then you watch this and you're like, oh, wait a minute. I can just start like talking to it and I can just start doing stuff and it will just like, it kind of just figures it out. And like, yeah, it'll probably be bad at a bunch of stuff, but it'll probably be like pretty cool at a bunch, pretty good at a bunch of stuff. And so I don't know, maybe it's just sort of like, it's almost like OpenAI is going through this like enterprise versus consumer like battle or something. It's like the last 6 months, I'd be like, it's all about the enterprise. And I think we've all gotten tired of hearing about it. And then it's like yesterday in these demos, and I think, we're going to see Microsoft build, Matt will be at that next week. I'm sure there'll be some stuff there. And then Apple's keynote is the following. So it's like, I feel like we're just getting a shot in the arm of like, here's a bunch of consumer stuff that people are going to throw at us that'll just make it more fun, right? And it'll sort of get us revitalized, at least for a few months before we get tired of it again.
so I'm gonna try out the theory for a while that the way to figure out enterprise AI is to make just work fun. Maybe not all of fun, but like just think like whatever you're doing day to day, if there was a fun version of this, what would that be? And like if you can get the AI thing to do it, then do that, right? Like just like I don't even know what, but that would be the whole
Well,
point
the
of
one
getting
thing,
the.
I even I think, and I know it's different time zones for you, so you obviously couldn't watch this in real time. But we had a bunch of people in the Software Fine Talk Slack watching, so everyone should come watch the stuff. It's always fun to kind of watch it as a group. But one thing they showed that I think that you have tried was like in Google was like, hey, summarize all the emails from your kid's school. Right. And
Yes.
I really felt for a moment. I was like, oh, they've been listening to Software Defined Talk. Like, I feel like we've talked about this a million times. And like every parent has this. It's like, I don't know. The school sent 50 messages and I'm lost. And sure enough, they did it. And I think, well, why don't you tell the story? It sounds like you did it.
Well, sure.
So
Yeah, we
tell the
we
story of
had
what you did.
there was as you do for a school, there was a PDF sent out about some event, a field trip for one of my kids, and they go to Dutch school. This kid, so it was in Dutch, which totally not a problem. But just because this was out yesterday, I thought like, oh, uh, I should try this. So I just uploaded the PDF to Gemini, and I said, "Tell me what I need to do," and it was perfect. It just like it gave me a translation of the letter first because I asked it to, but then I said, and also just tell me what I need to do, and it was just 4 points. It was just like this date, you need to pay 35 euros, uh, and you don't need to provide a lunch. And I was
There you
like,
go.
done.
Everything you need to know,
Oh,
right?
I know one. If it knew me well, it would have excluded this. Maybe this is what the LLMs can learn after a while. But the one I left off is that looking for volunteers. So
Of
that would be
course.
great personalization if it just like didn't even include that.
Yeah, don't need to do that. Well, I think that's good. And so they showed in Gmail, they showed a similar idea that you could, so this is kind of like make work fun. Maybe that's a little, maybe we're asking for a little too much there, but the idea, like in the Gmail, they showed basically, hey, summarize all the emails from, in this case, summarize all the emails on this subject that I've received in like the last whatever,
Yeah.
2 weeks, and it kicks out, and it was great. And I was just kind of to the point of like what can people do? So I use Outlook at work, so I'm just gonna like, so it'd be great. Like we have talked about and seen a bunch of demos like this a ton, right? And so it'd be great if I had something like this in Outlook. So I'm just going to read to you now. Okay, here's what in the what's new of Outlook. Here's what I currently it wants me to know about that they've just given me. It's like hide sent messages and conversations. Okay, whatever.
Good.
Live collaboration and email. Again, don't even know what that is. I don't even know why I would do it. We have so many ways to collaborate. Your day is one click away. So again, yet another view of like your entire day, right? Customize your reminders. Add shared and delegate mailbox folders to your favorites. So like I won't belittle this, right? But this is like I'm just reading the things that are on here, and it's like no, like why can't I have this? Like like right here, like you've been telling me. In this case, I guess we're picking on Microsoft a little bit, but like you've been telling me how great OpenAI or how great OpenAI is with Microsoft. And you've been telling me all these great things they do. It's like, why can I not just do this and out like give me that, right? Like summarize the messages from my boss for the last week. Summarize, and it's like, who doesn't want that? So there is something about like, the long disconnect between the enterprise and actually getting something that's I won't even say fun, just something that gives you like a
Yeah.
tiniest bit of joy. Whereas like this stuff was like, man, I just left these demos like lots of joy, lots of little fun things that I'm going to try, and I even know a lot of it won't work, right? But I even had the feeling because you brought it up earlier. It's like, man, I wish I could switch Alexa and Siri to this like immediately. Like I just wish that there was like some check box where it's like, fine, I don't even care if half the things are wrong. It'd be so much better than either one of those assistants. I would do it in a heartbeat, but I'm sure that'll take like months or years to get that done.
Yeah. I think there's some good experiments thrown there. Like, well, okay. So there's three things. And one, there would be a good experiment with the new O thing, to say, let's say you were going to cook something and you want it to retain the context of what you're cooking so you can ask it questions ongoing, right? Because that's a limitation of Siri and Alexa's. It has no context, more or less, like time to time, right? But over the course of an hour, like baking a pie is an infamously, the phrase "easy as pie" is a lie, right? Like pie is very difficult to cook, and so like that would be something you could use some guidance. In fact, baking a pie might be even harder than convincing Janice in finance that you should acquire a company. Like it might be a more difficult process. Now, the other thing is like I think maybe what I need to do is like finally get like a Google Workspace account,
Mm-hmm.
because I think they're limiting actually getting all the Gemini stuff in all of your Google Docs and Gmail unless you have a workspace thing, because I don't
Yep.
have it.
That seems to be
Which,
right. Yep.
which I guess is a good way to like what's the word? Rate limit. I mean, to kind of like limit doing this stuff. But I, you know, if your email scenario actually worked, that would be like the next phenomenal thing to see. Or like, if because I have like, I don't know, over 20 years of email in there. And I talked about trying to do this experiment earlier, and it only goes back like 6 months, but that would be kind of interesting. And and then if it could actually take actions, and I could say like, just get rid of all this email I don't need. Like that would be fun. But so maybe if I sign up for that, that would like even do more of the proving of it. And then finally, yeah, I think we don't talk about it as much as we used to, but like going to Costco is fun, and it's just grocery shopping, right? And so like there's definitely that mentality that the Costco people have of like this should be like a destination that people go to, something fun and enjoyable with delights. And so, you should try to have work be like that. Like it's fun to go there. Maybe you don't have slides and dogs under desks and all of that, but at least like, endeavor to not have it just be boring. Just have little fun moments here and there, which
Yeah, and so maybe it's worth just
yeah.
taking a few minutes. We'll back up and say, like, I think really it's worth your time and effort to go watch some of these demos. But kind of the strategy side of it, a couple things that jumped out. It'd be interesting to get your take on some of this. Cote was like one, it's sort of like okay, the one of the biggest things because at the end they had the leader of Android come out. And not surprisingly, after watching all this, they basically said, and it makes sense that for them, Gemini, Android will basically sort of be redefined around Gemini, right? So they have the hardware and the software, so you can buy the phone and the assistants, and they kind of showed that like going forward, it's sort of like I think they just view it almost like you'll end up like talking to your phone and like allowing your phone to do kind of see and do all of these things. So for the first time, I was like, I can see why if I was at Apple, like you'd be like a little worried, right? Because if you kind of think of all the apps on a phone are meant often trying to help you do something, some kind of something simple, right? Maybe hard, maybe simple, but you could see for a moment where it was like, oh, wait a minute, like the future, if these things got really good and you could just talk to them, and I'm not saying this will happen like even in the next year, but like you could see where that would sort of like, if you will, pull back the Apple dominance. So I don't know, Cote, if you're over at Apple and you just watched all these demos today, and the rumor is Apple is going to have a strong relationship with ChatGPT, and I don't know. I guess my question is like, how worried would you be if you were Tim Cook, and maybe more importantly, like how quickly would you be like, not only do we have to build this, but maybe we got to go like own the best thing, because like your cash cow, like I always say, it's like everybody's a genius at business until your cash cow gets disrupted. And it's like, if you're at Apple and you're like, oh my gosh, and maybe we could talk about Google too. It's sort of like, how much will this disrupt Google's core search business? And if you're at Apple, like how much will this disrupt your own iPhone business? And like, are you so scared that you go out and be like, I gotta somehow find a way to buy ChatGPT?
Yeah. And then also because of all the EU and antitrust stuff, it also makes it difficult because, on the one hand, what is it, 25 billion dollars annually between Google and Apple?
Yep.
Like for just, as I joked, changing one line in a YAML file to
Yep.
have the
You're
default
referring to the
search.
search engine, yeah, default search
Yeah,
engine.
yeah, yeah. And so like that's a pretty good business on either side. You have to presume, right? So they don't want to screw that up because they do have all the money in the world, but $20 billion a year is pretty close to all the money in the world. It's you're talking all the money in a hemisphere maybe, and so it would make sense if you liked that partnership for in both directions to extend the partnership further into this, right? And the Apple angle would just be like, we don't do that. Right? Like it's like we also don't work on industrial paints and solvents.
Mhm.
So we're not
But I
doing
think that
that.
what you're getting at to paint that picture, like, the whole outline, the way I see it is like, okay, yes, Google and Apple, they have that $20 billion relationship seems to work. But if you're Tim Cook, you're like, okay, Google is my number one competitor, at least making the smartphone operating system, Android, right? And now they've shown me a version of Android in a Pixel where they're really trying to basically make it such that like all that's going to matter going forward is this interaction, this voice interaction with like an assistant, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That could complete which is sort of them attacking my core business, at least potentially, right? Now, of course, maybe it won't work, maybe it won't be as good. And so if you're on the Apple side of that, you're like, what if I took this $20 billion that I'm getting for free? I mean, basically with no, like, to your cent, like I changed the YAML file. That's all the work that's involved, right? And I got a check for $20 billion. Like maybe I just take this $20 billion and I just go over to GPT and be like, I got $20 billion here, free money to play with. Like you and we're about to like, I'm going to make sure that you're the assistant that is just as good, if not better than Gemini. And I want to make sure you're tied to me because I don't, the Google people, like we like each other, but we don't. And I think there's so it's a really interesting kind of like, I guess the ultimate frenemy kind of thing going on there, right? It's like, maybe I don't even know if prisoner's dilemma is the right way, but it's like if one of them moves, if one moves to displace the other, right? Then that, that whole relationship maybe starts to get unwound in some way going forward.
Yeah. I like that because I was thinking earlier today when I was thinking about this stuff that like there's obviously some consumer product think going on at OpenAI. Like they're pretty good at like sticking to that and being, consumer product thinking. And who's the king or queen, who's the monarch of that but Apple, right? Like
Yeah.
they're excellent at that. So like it is those two would make a lot of sense together. And then there's just a question of, do you limit it to the Apple world? And I think the answer would be yes. like like that would, I mean, you're already because having it fully integrated, because that's the main asset Apple has is the customer base. The loyal is even the wrong word. I don't know what churn is for Apple customers, but I would suspect it's a very low churn customer base that people go from Apple to Android. Compared to like whatever else. I don't whatever. So it's probably like a pretty good customer base, and you trust that you can keep that churn low, if not grow it. And then if you just add this new feature that really makes people stick, it doesn't have to be your platform, but it just makes them stick with you.
Right.
Then whatever phones evolve into, it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, you want them to
right?
stay with. And the thing that, the other parts that are kind of interesting there too is sort of like, obviously everybody knows it costs a lot of money to run these, chat bots behind the scenes. And what's clear and what, Google spent a lot of time talking about was like all the different models they have. And the Nano model is basically their version of something that runs on device. And all indications are Google's going to have some model that's going to run on device. And why that may make sense is like, okay, they have the chips and they've optimized the chips, because if you can start to unload some of the queries, right, to just run locally, that's going to be a huge cost savings, right, for whoever runs this. So there's like real advantage there too. It's like, can you figure this out? Because I think, on my side, I've said this many times on this podcast already. It's like, as soon as you start telling me about which models and I have to pick models, I start to zone out. You're making me do work. And it's like, but behind the scenes, it's like, yeah, these companies kind of figure that out. It's like, oh, this query goes to on device, and this query, I am going to make the call back to the server, and I'm going to make sure it's fast enough that it's a real-time conversation and you're getting something interesting. And I think, Apple's got some interesting there. So it is kind of like, it is, so often we see, and I guess ChatGPT is a little bit, it's a smaller company here, but like, it's just interesting to see when the Titans go at it, right? It's just like, basically Apple, Google, I mean, I think they're like, I don't know, in the top 5 most valuable companies in the world or something like that. And it's like, this one really feels like it's going to play out at that level. Whereas oftentimes it's like, oh, this small company is going to come in and disrupt everyone. And it's like, no, the disruptors, like, they know about it. So it just feels like it's going to be real fun to watch, I think, for the next few years.
Yeah. The only, like the main question based on what we're saying would be, Apple has proven not to be good at frequently experimenting in public. In fact, they're terrible at it, right? Like they came out with this, the freeform thing, which was kind of cool, and that's the end of the idea. like they haven't really, and only in the last 12 months did they add the ability to put links in notes on your phone. Like, and so it's kind of like, and they don't really like, there's not like a lot of features that come out all the time that get retracted, that get withdrawn and then changed. Whereas we were just talking about, right? Like it seems like ChatGPT's approach or OpenAI's approach is just to like provide a general thing and see what happens and keep evolving it. Do they keep evolving it? I mean, they also kind of have a slow trickle of features, but maybe faster than iOS features. Like,
Mhm.
anyways, also they only have one thing. But that would be the thing is like if they did combine together, they would have to avoid making like a Willy Wonka chocolate factory where you don't hear from them from like 10 years, right? Like they would have
Yeah.
to keep this like openness and keep trying to do things. Now, which is probably fine, although people do end up killing their acquisitions for whatever reason. That's something that occurs. And another advantage might be that then if Apple and OpenAI were together, the OpenAI people could just be like, fuck all that enterprise shit, and they could just focus on consumer stuff. And like they'd be like, RBAC, I don't know, we don't need that,
Yeah, we don't
right?
care.
Like
Right.
we can do that in the same way that like I guess the iPhone was actually pretty quick to get Exchange support. I don't actually remember when that happened. But at some point, Apple was like, all right, you can like, you can add Exchange as an email thing. And nowadays, I don't know the numbers, but I feel like iPhones and Macs are maybe not corporate standards, but are definitely upstanding corporate citizens
Right.
on IT networks. And so eventually you could go around to enterprise stuff. But as far as worrying about like, because I mean, you have to imagine the amount of like legal risk and brand risk these enterprise AI companies must be taking on is, it's got to be prohibitive, right? Like you don't want to be in a situation where you've used enterprise AI at a pharmaceutical company and like people die, like your
Yeah.
startup's done. And so like you've got to find these like very low risk enterprise scenarios that you're getting involved in. And is there enough money in those to like do anything? And so what you could do, I mean, Apple is pretty good at like sitting out tough markets until like they're made, and then it goes in and like perfects the solution, right? And so they could kind of wait for this enterprise nonsense to like rattle around and get figured out. And of course, if they sucked up OpenAI, the only thing Microsoft and Google would have left would be the enterprise, more or less. I
Yeah.
mean, not the only, but the biggest TAM, the biggest opportunity would be enterprise stuff. And then also the Google's okay, but Microsoft is best positioned to go after enterprise stuff, and
Absolutely.
IBM if they could build back up their reputation. And so they could go experiment and fail and be all weird. And then 10 years later, Apple could be like, okay, we'll integrate with Copilot, right?
Yeah.
And they could just add it in there.
Well,
Meanwhile,
maybe what
they
you're
would
getting at there
do
is
well.
like, and maybe what the main takeaway from yesterday was sort of like, the experimentation about what, again, back to the word I don't like, multimodal, but it's sort of, that was sort of the takeaway yesterday was like, oh, okay, we're starting to see like a whole different way to interact with this. That seems to be a completely different way to do new things. And that potentially has massive repercussions for the smartphone market. And maybe that's your point. Like that's what Apple's like, okay, we're starting to see it take shape. Almost back to the music player market. It's like, all right, there's MP3s, you can rip them to a hard disk, there's a computer. We're seeing people do that, but putting it together in an iPod sort of unlocked this incredible value. And maybe that's the Tim Cook kind of thing. It's like we're watching very closely. We think it's getting closer. And now is maybe the time, and we're going to see in their announcement in a few weeks, like maybe they build their own LLMs, maybe they find some way that it's all integrated in the Apple way. And we're like, that's exactly what we wanted, right? Because they've done it before. Or like you said before, maybe it's like the Vision Pro, where we're like, that looks really cool. I definitely don't want it. I mean, it's kind of, so it'll be fun. But we should talk a little bit about, before we get out of here, a little bit about the palace intrigue happening in all these companies. Because I don't know if it's related or not. Kote, you can keep me honest here, but it's sort of like we saw all this great technology, but of course, behind all technology are companies. Companies are made of people, and people. There's always a lot going on with people. So one, Ilya from OpenAI officially resigned and left the company, and of course, there was like lots of good Twitter posts about everyone likes each other. Of course, Ilya's going to go on to do some other project. Sam Altman and the team are really supportive, and all is good. Now, of course, we go back to Thanksgiving. Remember, Ilya voted. He was the key swing vote in actually ousting Sam for like at least 72 hours. So I thought that was interesting that he officially exited, and he exited like right after this demo. So I wasn't sure if that was like good PR. It was like, hey, we did a great demo. The company looks like it's on good footing. And then Ilya, now it's time for you to move on. And of course, I'm sure he's moved on from the company many months ago. But then right after that, another executive from OpenAI, I guess that resigned like the, essentially right after that. And that person was not named in any of the other announcements. So I don't know if that was unexpected or what was going on. So I was saying in the Slack, this is sort of like, this feels like a very Empire Strikes Back, because again, I like to tell the story as the movie, right? So we had in November, right? We had sort of like, Star Wars, the first kind of kicks off. There's a lot of stuff happening. Then it seems like Sam Altman and team have like retaken control. Everyone's happy. We saw the report that came out that said Sam is doing a great job. There are no details about why anyone, what all the ruckus was about. And so now Ilya is going off. So my prediction is like in a year to 6 months, there's going to be a book about, behind the scenes at OpenAI where it actually comes out like what actually went down. And that's maybe setting up our Return of the Jedi trilogy. Is like, will Ilya go out and start a new company? Is he going to go work for Apple? Is there some craziness inside of OpenAI that we don't know about? So I guess within all of this, all of the ideas, and I'm sure Apple and all these companies and Microsoft are watching this like, these people have great technology, but there seems to be a lot of internal shuffling. So can we trust them with our big business? So what do you think, Cote? Where are you at in the saga?
Well, maybe, after I didn't watch all the demos, but I saw lots of screenshots from those demos. And my first thought was like, those people seem really young. So maybe he just aged out or something. And he's like in his late 30s. So he had to leave. But, ageist jokes aside. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it because usually I just like don't pay close attention to executive shuffling. But it is really weird to have executive movements like around an announcement. Like it doesn't really, you think you would have it done before, or you would just put them on garden leave for like 3 months and just have them leave then, right? Like there's a notion of like, because I'm not a PR person, but you're not really, I guess it is like, we're talking about it, but maybe in the grand scheme of things, it did kind of bury it. Like, I don't know if anyone cares. Like there's enough going on that it kind of like de-emphasizes something instead of it being all on its own. But
to your point, like I think
I don't
you
know.
said before, I think you would sort of want to bury this a couple of weeks before or after, right? Because the report came out, everything's good, and then you'd sort of like last week you'd want to be like, hey, he's moved on, and then this week you'd have the demo. So I don't know, it's just something to watch, right? Because it's sort of like it feels like all startups are volatile. OpenAI seems like the most volatile, right? Like anything can literally go down. And then the other one, kind of in the world that we talk about all the time, is like we got to at least mention it. Andy Jassy, quote unquote, makes leadership announcements. So this is basically announcing that Adam Selipsky is leaving the company after being there, rejoining the company for essentially 3 years, and then he's being replaced by Matt Garman, who seems to be a strong like lifer at AWS, been there 18 years, strong product focus. It seems like he'll come in and take over. So I don't know, when you saw this, Cote, like, did you have any immediate thoughts about like why this happens? I couldn't help but just think to myself, it's like, here we're watching all of this AI stuff happening. And for the most part, AWS is sort of like on the outside looking in, right? They're like, yeah, we have all these models, but like, it doesn't feel like, and maybe it's a conscious decision, but like, it just felt like they're not being mentioned in here. And maybe this is just kind of like, I'm putting together things that are just unrelated, but it's like, hey, maybe we need a new leader to kind of be looking at some of the stuff because we're not in this area. That's kind of how I was thinking about it yesterday. What do you think?
Well, it seems like the AI stuff, unless you're an irrational board or CEO, which I feel like the Amazon people probably aren't. Like the window for AI stuff is like so small that it'd be hard to judge an executive's performance on it. Because like in order to get to the point where a lot of these companies are, you would have had to start like 5 years ago or so.
Right.
And so there's a bit, so, and then also coupled with that is like, I mean, we haven't talked about them very much, but AWS is still number one,
Doing great.
like
Just went over the
by
$100
far.
billion run rate. Yep.
Right. And just like pumping out cash for Amazon. So it's like probably one of the, maybe not like by whatever like investment metrics or you know, stock price metrics or whatever. It's probably one of the best businesses to be in charge of because you got all the numbers, right? And so like it seems weird that you would want to leave a good business, but like, you know, I think there would be everything's okay, just whatever case, if it turns out that like, you know, suddenly this guy is like the CEO of IBM or something. Like whenever you see an executive movement where it's like, why did they leave? And it's like, oh, now they're in charge of JP Morgan Chase. You're like, got it. Right. Like they were just like, this is a great opportunity, but this is like gonna be on my headstone. Right. Like
Mhm.
when I go to this thing where it's like, you know, being head of AWS, big deal, but it's not going to be like the crowning achievement of your career. And so like, maybe there's some other thing, but if whenever whatever, I of course I don't know the case of this, but whenever I look at executive movements, if the executive like pops up at some sort of like second or third tier startup or like networking vendor, I'm always like, I wonder what happened there, right?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
now
I
the you know, the humane thing that sometimes happens, this would happen with me, it's why I am an individual contributor, is I would just be like, fuck, I just sold all those RSUs and why
I'm
am I
rich.
stressed out all the time? Right?
Uh-huh.
Like I'm out. Like I want to go create another configuration automation company. That seems like fun, right? Like I want to go do something that's like challenging and interesting, but not like where I've got to like, you know, fly to Switzerland overnight to like tell the Swiss army we're not going to fuck up the deal. Right. Like, you know, all sorts of stressful shit that you would have to do in a position like this.
Well, the part of this announcement from Andy Jassy, because it's all written out, they put it out there, that I thought was most interesting to me was this. So this is basically Andy Jassy writing about Adam's departure. It says, quote, um, in those conversations, we agreed that if he accepted the role, he'd likely do it for a few years. And that one of the things he'd focus on during that time was helping prepare the next generation of leadership. And it's like, I don't know. That was the one sentence in here that kind of caught me off guard. It's like, it just doesn't feel like if you're interviewing at Amazon, you're like, hey, I'll come in, I'll do it for a couple of years. And then, you know, I'm going to turn it over to someone else and leave. It just, you know, like everything we know is it just feels like they would want people to come in and, you know, be very passionate about it and feeling like there's like sort of like some life's work to be done here. So I don't know if that, you know, who knows? I don't know what they talked about before him rejoining. I can't say it, but it kind of felt like it seemed at odds with like how I think of Amazon as both a recruiter as well as the people that they want to be there successful. Because all the things you kind of mentioned before was good. It's like maybe he just decided he didn't want to, you know, that ultimately it's not the kind of work he wanted to do. Makes sense. Maybe ultimately, even though he's the CEO of AWS, one of the best businesses ever, probably one of the best jobs from a CEO perspective, you're still not the CEO of the company. You know what I mean? You still have a
Sure.
boss. So maybe that's just like, no, I'm rich. I want to have all the control. That would make sense to me. But then there's also just been like, I don't know, man. I would just describe his tenure as like good but awkward, right? It's just never, you know, it's like when you watch the keynote, it's like fine, you know, Adam did fine, but not, you know, not the same, right? Not and also too, just the product portfolio, great. AWS announces all kinds of great stuff all the time. None of it's particularly like, you know, you go in the console's now got like 250 services. You're like, okay, good. But like it isn't, you know, it hasn't like changed you or grabbed you in a way. And maybe he's just
Well, that's
suffering
interesting.
from those perceptions. And finally, I'll just say it's like, regardless of the relationship between Andy and Adam and whoever knows, one thing is definitely true, right? When you take over, like I think, you know, as I've said before, Andy Jassy, maybe the greatest run anyone has ever had other than Jeff Bezos in corporate America. Like, I mean, he basically started what is now $100 billion business. If you take that over and that person's still your boss, it's going to be hard because that person's always going to be like, not sure I would have done that. You know, even if they don't say it out loud, you're always being judged on a really high bar by a very difficult person that has all the information. And in the end, maybe it's just like, I want another. I think this other person this other protege of mine can do it better. And so we'll watch. We'll see if the next person lasts more than 3 years. That'll be the fun thing for us to actually see.
Yeah, I guess sometimes it could be like, having your mother-in-law tell you what you're doing wrong raising your kids. Like it might be
Never
a
fun.
little stressful. Yeah. Well, thinking of things, speaking of things that are fun and stressful, do we have any bureaucracy this week, Brandon?
The only bureaucracy is the what I like to say all the time is that if you would like a sticker for your laptop for your summertime in the Northern Hemisphere. So again, that's what tumblers, coolers, kids' bikes, your bike, wherever you want to put the sticker. All you have to do
Someone else's bike.
Someone else's bike. All you have to do is send your postal address to stickers@softwaredefinedtalk.com. I will be happy to send you a sticker anywhere in the world.
Also, speaking of bureaucracy, if you haven't subscribed to my newsletter yet, if you go to newsletter.cote.io, you'll get all sorts of, you've listened this far, topics I like and how I talk about them. I do that in the newsletter. Plus, I just got an email from someone about a newsletter, the last one I sent, where they really enjoyed the what I call the wastebook section, where I just find funny little quotes and quips and just quick ideas. A wastebook, the kind of things you would jot down or like save in your little file. And I typically have a section like that, which is pretty fun and entertaining. But I've also been looking at a bunch of surveys of all the stuff we talk about here. I don't know, stuff like that is in there, and then also just shameless self-promotion of things that also appears in there, but I try to keep that to a not annoying minimum. And also, if I'm promoting something, I think it's awesome and you should be consuming it. Speaking of things you should be consuming, there's some conferences coming up. As I kind of mentioned earlier, next week on May 22nd, I'll be in Atlanta hosting an executive dinner. There's a landing page. You can try to get in. It's kind of like, try to invite yourself, invite only. If you're the kind of working at the kind of organization that we at VMware Tanzu by Broadcom like to sell our platforms to and things like that, then they'll probably let you in. I don't know. I just do my job and show up and talk about digital transformation. Anyways, if you go to softwaredefinedtalk.com/467, you can look at the conferences section and find a link to that dinner. There's also, as Brandon mentioned, Microsoft Build is next week, May 21st to 23rd, and Matt Ray will be there. So it'll be fun to see what he does. There's NDC Oslo, June 12th, where I'll be speaking. We've got DevOps Days Amsterdam, June 19th and 21st. I'll also be speaking there. I will not be speaking at DevOps Days Birmingham, Alabama, August 19th to 21st. And while it's not confirmed yet, I probably will be speaking, or at least at, the Spring One VMware Explorer in Las Vegas, which is going to be August 26th to 29th. We have one in Barcelona sometime in November. Just search for that if you're interested. Hopefully I'll be there as well. And then finally, there's SRE Day London 2024, September 19th and 20th. I will be speaking there, and there's a 20% off discount code you can use. SRE 20 Day. That's 20% off. I think I've spoke at that conference once, twice. I forget, but they also have one in San Francisco and maybe even Amsterdam. I forget. Also, I wanted to comment on some of the nonsense we have. We also track our nonsense links. If you go to softwaredefinedtalk.467, apparently speaking of summer, there's a Yeti now has a 34-ounce French press. And I looked up what it would cost in the Netherlands. I didn't even do shipping. It's 125 euros, which is, if you add 10% to that, that's like $145 US, I think. Again, I can't do math in public. But I was looking at it and I was thinking, like, 34 ounces. This is a problem with the imperial system, is I kind of don't really even know how much 34 ounces is. I know it's a lot, but I can't like visualize it. So I had to go convert it. And that is a few milliliters over a liter of coffee that you might have. And I was just imagining actual French people using the Yeti 32-ounce French press thing and being like, I'm French, and even I don't need a liter of coffee. Like, I guess maybe you're supposed to share this when you're out there fishing in the Gulf or whatever in your Columbia sun reflecting shirts with your Yeti coolers. But wow, that is a lot of coffee. On the other hand, I wish I had one. That'd be fun. Speaking of things I wish I had, what do you recommend this episode, Brandon?
Well, Kote, just to help you promote your newsletter, I just quickly went through and said, what was the subject title of the last newsletter, so everyone can get a flavor of what you write about. So the last one I have here in my inbox is the subject is quote microwaving fish and rice cookers. So there you
Yes.
go. If you're interested in that and many other topics, you should
Uh-huh.
therefore and maybe we'll just do that from now on. I'll just start reading one arbitrary subject line of
That's good.
Cote's thing. But it's good. It's always good just to check out Cote's newsletter. If you're looking for something to watch, there's the Dark Matter, which is a new series from Apple TV, Apple TV Plus, which I know doesn't have that many subscribers, but like I feel like whoever's the programming director, they're in my Audible list of books because I read this book. I think Matt originally recommended Dark Matter a while back. It's a pretty popular book, and so far the episodes, only the first two were out, but it seems pretty true to the book. So at this point, it's just self-serving. I just want Apple to keep making books I've read into good series because I like it. It's good. So if you're into some kind of like sci-fi, some interesting thing, what's going to happen, you should check out Dark Matter.
That'd be funny. Funny, but Apple should become the book to streaming premiere. That could be their thing. They do adapt. I guess all of them
I
adapt
do
in some
feel like
way.
they are. I mean, I don't watch. Obviously, there's a bunch of stuff on that I don't watch, but like, I feel like there's definitely a Gen X dad like on the committee. And I'm just like, whoever this person is, we got to make sure he stays on there because he did
Yeah.
Silo, which again, that's the.
Oh
I
yeah.
love that, but I mean, just like all these books I've read, I'm just like, this is so great. And
What was?
then I listen to the media people that like, no one's watching Apple TV. Is Apple TV
Uh,
committed to this? And I'm like, listen, we pay them so much money. Like, why can't we just have these TV shows too? Like, I don't even know. It's like just a public service to like Gen X fathers. It's maybe all it is. But I'm worried. I'm worried they're going to cancel them all. I'm just,
you have to do one of those things where you hold your driver's license up to your phone to verify your identity and
yeah, I'm just
age.
like, come on, this is for me. Like, the
Yeah.
kids have the YouTube. Just give me Apple TV. I just
Yeah.
want like the books I've read and made into good movies or short series. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. That would, someone else commented on this, but like I don't know if there are any, but there definitely are not that many Neil Stephenson adaptations, which you would expect. I don't
Those
know
are
if
hard
that's because
books. Yeah,
those are impossible books to adapt, but like if anyone could do it, I think the Apple people, the Apple Studios,
sure.
the HBO Discovery Channel people. I don't know what's going on over there. Maybe the Disney people, but the Disney people, they're not gritty enough, even though
Well,
they've got the
my
Marvel.
theory is, because Netflix did Three Body Problem, they adapted that, which again recommended on the show, liked it. But my theory was like, oh, Apple had to pass on this one because there's a lot of because it's a book from a lot of things happening in
Oh yeah.
China, which I'm sure it would be difficult for Apple. And I'm just like, oh, they probably were like, this is perfect. Of course we would make this, but we can't. Sorry. So you have to take this one to Netflix. But yeah, all the other stuff, or they're like, hey, bring back a version that doesn't have so much of the things happen in China, we'll make it. But just keep up the good work, Apple TV. It's fine. You got to pass on a couple of them. I understand. You got to make money. Can't just be out here making everyone mad, but just, keep making them all the other ones for me.
Well, we managed not to talk about open source business models in this episode, even though the thought occurred in my head at some point, but I didn't bring it up. But how did I? Oh, Brian Gracely, the Cloudcast friend of ours, he sent over to me publicly, whatever, in our Slack channel, this episode with Rod Johnson, the Spring creator, founder, all that kind of stuff. All around great guy, Australian. I don't know if Matt Ray runs into him while he's out there getting a. Do they call it a Maryland? What was the name of the Australian chicken that has the thigh and the leg combined?
I
The
don't know, but I know what you're talking
Tasty,
about.
I think is what they
Mm.
call it. I had some of those last night. They're great. Anyways, he was on this podcast, The Business of Open Source, that I should have known about because I went to go message, I believe her name's Emily, about the show afterwards. And when I opened up my LinkedIn IM thing, I saw that she had sent me a message in 2000 telling me she was starting this podcast. So I was like, hey, I finally listened to your podcast.
Hey, just getting back to you now.
But anyways, she's got a whole podcast that's about the business of open source, and I've listened to a few other episodes, and they're pretty good. I need to listen to more of them before I'm like they're all great. But no, they are good because they're very narrowly focused on this, and she discusses a lot of the topics that we do with the open source people. And what's great about them is at least the 3 episodes I've listened to so far, she asked like the CEOs, founders, executives about like I've just started listening to the Adam Jacobs one, so I'll see how that turns out. But she asked them like she doesn't say it this way, but she's like, so how did coming up with an open source business model go? And so far, the three I've listened to have all been like, "Ooh, talk about a shit show." Like they basically were all just like, "This is really hard. It's difficult." And I think the interview with Rod is great because it has a good sweeping historic thing to it. Of course, still highly relevant to me since I work at VMware Tanzu by Broadcom, where we have Spring and lots of interesting commentary. And like I think he had he's a very like level set but straight talking person, and he was basically like he's one of these people who says look a lot. I'm not going to do an Australian accent, but he's like, look, what we discovered is one, you should listen to your customers. And he had a very frank way of doing it. It's like we tried to build a platform and no one really needed that, and then we just did what our customers said they needed, and that worked. And then he was like, and it turns out you just sell all the stuff around Spring, and that works. And so there you go. It was a great interview with some other insights. He had some complaining about post Spring Source into VMware acquisition too, as a teaser. If you want to listen to that stuff, complaining. I don't think Rod would complain about stuff. I think he would comment on it.
Oh, there you go. Well, you already mentioned it too. But I was gonna say Adam Jacob. I mean, at least I was worried we weren't gonna get his name in on the show this week, but like I listened to the podcast as well, so he tells his story, and if you haven't heard him talk before, and he's been on this show and others, but like he tells his take as well, so you can go listen to that and get his open source take, which is always strong.
He had I've only listened up. I guess if you've listened to it, you'll remember she asked him, "What's the difference between a CTO and a CEO, and why would you choose to do both of them?" And he had. When I was listening to it, I was biking to pick up one of my daughters. I realized this is a very Adam way to answer a question. He went over the question, and at the end, he was like, "So far, people tell me it's going well, so seems good."
Well, also too, his answer. I mean, it's kind
of. His answer was also like, "I just wanted to see if I could do it," and you're like, "Oof."
Right. Well, I think it was that, but I think it was a little bit like, I just wanted to be the one to make the decisions, which is like really exactly the reason you should become. I mean, it's just funny. It's like that is the reason to become CEO. It's like, I want all the pain, but I want to make the decisions, which is funny. But he led up to it. It was like probably 2 to 3 minutes to get to that point, which was funny, I thought. So, but again, I say that
decider.
With all due respect. I'm just like, yes, I decided I wanted to be the person to make decisions. 100% support you. That's why you should be CEO.
Yep. Well, speaking of things you would want to do, you obviously wanted to listen to this entire episode of Software Defined Talk. This is episode 467. You can get, if you go to the show notes, you can see links to things we talked about, lots of things we didn't talk about. You can figure out how to buy that 145 euro French press to make just over a liter of coffee for you and your friends. But if you go to softwaredefinedtalk.com/467, you can also join our Slack community and things like that. We'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, well done. On the after show here, because we started on a little bit of family planning, I wanted you to give me your short opinion of like meal planning for the family. Have you automated the process of what is the family going to eat tonight? And do you have any tips for us on how the rest of us could automate our daily or weekly meal planning?
Sure. Well, this is a topic I think about a lot, but it's going to be a quick after show. The answer is no.
That's great. So no, but is it the answer like you delegate? Is that what you've done?
No. I think I at least when I'm here, I end up I make the kids lunch, and I cook them dinner at least half of nights, if not more. And the only thing that I would really like, I've been thinking of using ChatGPT to come up with this for me, because I feel like the most difficult thing, I wouldn't call it meal planning, but what I want like the AWS of meal planning. I want to just have a pantry and a refrigerator full of all the basic parts that I need.
Right.
Because I want to figure out what I want to make like 30 minutes before I'm going to make it. And I just want the confidence that I have it there. Now, let's see if I can extend the metaphor. The only other thing is like, I also want to like I think one of the main ways eat healthy is by not having crap food around the house, which is
Right.
very difficult to achieve because when you remove the crap food, that doesn't remove your need to like eat something. So
Right.
you've
Right.
got to
You
like
still eat.
put something in its place. And like, I like carrots, but like I'm not going to be eating carrots and celery the whole time, right? So like I need like I need something as well engineered as like the crap food that you can just like have every now and then, right? So that's the thing that I really need the help with is like, what are, and it's just a ridiculous cliche thing, but like, what are the healthy snacks and in between meal things that I could stock the kitchen with, right? Like, because like, I don't want to like fry an egg for a snack, or I don't want to like make a bowl of like yogurt. Like I just want like I want to be able to have that same user experience of like, here's something satisfying wrapped in a plastic package that I'm going to rip open, eat, and regret.
Yep.
Right. Like, but like it needs to be something along those lines. So that's the only other meal planning we have is there is a the on Wednesdays the fish wagon is here, so we get the kibbling, and that's about it.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, you have one, if you will, tent pole in your weekly rotation of meals, and then I guess
It
we'll say
starts there. A little nudge.
you're very agile. You're very agile from then on out. So there you go. I think, hey, in the end, maybe maybe that's the way to do it. It's just like stay nimble, like because every time I've either been a part or tried to put in some planning, it doesn't seem to work. So maybe that's the answer is just to accept that. Just be like, you know what, you'll figure out
Yeah.
dinner around 5 o'clock. When everyone starts to get hungry, you'll be like, either we got
Yeah.
something in here we can cook, or we're going out. Those are really the two choices. That's it.
And then I'll also, as long-term listeners will know, I'm pretty spoiled in that it takes like 4 minutes, if not less, to walk to the grocery store.
Oh,
So like
well,
it's
that's even
always
better,
easy
right?
just to like go there and get something. But
Well,
but that
mhm.
that also presupposes like that, not that you do it, but that you bake that time in there. But anyways, it does make it a lot easier to make up for just to
All
make
right.
shit up.
Well, in the end, everyone, you can all benefit from some really important advice. Live close to a grocery store. So for
Yes.
everyone who watched, hey, a really good turnout today. I think this time was probably a little bit better, at least for some people in the United States. So I appreciate seeing Brian on, Michael's on, Systems Guy, Brett, a bunch of other people. Always fun to see you in the Slack, or not in the Slack in this case, in the chat. And we'll see you soon in the Slack. So we'll record next week's time, maybe a little different as well. So stay tuned. Hopefully you can join us. And until then, we will see you